During the Cold War, the deployment of the B-52 usually carried a very clear strategic message: the ability to deliver destruction at the highest possible level. But in Vietnam, the B-52 was not used in that way. In late 1972, B-52 bombers were deployed to strike targets in North Vietnam. The focus was on infrastructure centers, transportation networks, and objectives of strategic value. These were not battlefield support strikes. They were the use of strategic bombing at large scale, directly aimed at core areas. At this point, the American objective was no longer to expand the conflict or to seek military victory in the traditional sense. The focus had shifted to generate pressure strong enough to adjust the balance at the negotiating table. The bombing was not intended to force immediate collapse. It was meant to send a clear message that the United States still possessed significant escalation capability and was prepared to use it if negotiations did not proceed in the desired direction. In this context, the B-52 was no longer merely a bomb carrier. It became a strategic lever used to increase leverage in the final phase of the Vietnam War. However, despite the B-52's close association with nuclear deterrence during the Cold War, the use of nuclear weapons in Vietnam was never a realistic option. The reasons were not only military, they lay in a broader international context. The risk of direct escalation with the Soviet Union and China, and the possibility of transforming a regional conflict into a confrontation between nuclear powers. Within those limits, the United States was forced to apply the greatest level of force possible, while remaining below the nuclear threshold. And the B-52, with its ability to carry extremely large conventional bomb loads and operate independently at the strategic level, became the most suitable tool for that role. When a unit is used to generate strategic pressure in this way, the critical question is not how powerful it is, but how it must be configured to perform that role correctly. Item 0. Platform Deployment Base, B-52. This list begins with Item 0 because the B-52 was not equipment. It was the deployment platform that allowed the entire loadout behind it to exist. The B-52 defined the physical limits of the mission: operating altitude, range, bomb load capacity, and the mandatory systems required to conduct strategic bombing. Without the B-52, this loadout could not exist physically. Item 1. Primary Ordnance, M117, General Purpose Bomb. The M117 was selected because it was a standard high-explosive bomb available in large quantities in United States inventories at the time. Its weight was sufficient to destroy factories, storage facilities, and cause wide area damage across the target zone. This bomb was used to generate area effects, not to strike individual points precisely. Item 2. Secondary Ordnance, Mark 82, General Purpose Bomb. The Mark 82 was selected because its lighter weight allowed larger quantities to be carried per mission. Its primary purpose was to increase bomb density over target areas such as roads, assembly zones, and dispersed infrastructure. The Mark 82 was suited for area saturation rather than destruction of a single hardened structure. Item 3. Heavy Ordnance, Mark 84, General Purpose Bomb. The Mark 84 was included when greater destructive power was required. It was used against hardened structures, large bridges, or targets requiring deep penetration before detonation. It was not carried in large numbers. It existed to handle targets where lighter bombs were insufficient. Item 4. Area Effect Ordnance, Cluster Bomb. Units. Cluster munitions was selected when targets were dispersed across wide areas. They were used against assembly zones, logistics areas, and transportation corridors. The purpose of cluster bombs was to disable entire areas, not to destroy a single point. Item 5. Bomb Carriage and Configuration. The B-52 was chosen not only for the bombs it carried, but for how it carried and released them. The internal bomb bay allowed large quantities of conventional bombs to be carried and released in a stable and coordinated manner. Bomb carriage modifications were made to maximize bomb count per sortie. This matched the requirement to apply broad pressure rather than precision strikes. External bomb racks added further carrying capacity, at the cost of increased drag and high exposure to air defenses. This configuration existed for one purpose only: to release massive bomb loads over short periods of time at fixed tempo onto target areas. Without this carriage configuration, the ordnance in items 1 through 4 would exist only on paper. Item 6. Navigation and bombing systems. The B-52 did not bomb by direct visual observation. Navigation and bomb release relied entirely on radar and bombing computers. These systems allowed operations at night, through cloud cover, and in poor weather, where targets were not visible to the naked eye. Release timing was determined by data and trajectory calculations, not by crew eyesight. In the dense air defense environment of North Vietnam, minimizing exposure time and releasing bombs exactly as planned was critical. Without these systems, large bomb loads could not be employed effectively at the strategic level. Item 7. Electronic countermeasures. The B-52 was not designed to evade air defenses through maneuver. Its survivability depended on electronic countermeasures. ECM systems reduced the effectiveness of enemy radar, disrupting detection, tracking, and missile guidance. The goal was not invisibility, it was distortion, long enough to complete the mission and exit the area. In the North Vietnamese air defense environment, ECM was mandatory. Without it, deploying B-52s with heavy bomb loads would carry unacceptable risk. Item 8. Fuel load and range. The B-52 was employed on missions lasting many hours, not as a short-range strike platform. Fuel load directly determined bomb capacity and operational range. Every increase in bomb load required trade-offs in fuel, range, or loiter time. Aerial refueling capability allowed operations from bases outside direct battlefield reach. This enabled sustained deployment tempo without reliance on forward basing. Without sufficient fuel and aerial refueling, the B-52 could not be used strategically in Vietnam. Item 9. Oxygen system. The B-52 operated at altitudes where normal breathing was impossible. Oxygen systems were mandatory to keep crews alert and functional throughout the mission. Without them, neither altitude nor endurance could be exploited strategically. Item 10. Flight suit. Flight suits were not combat uniforms. They were protective equipment for long-duration work environments. Fire-resistant materials reduced risk in case of onboard fire or malfunction. Their purpose was to keep crews operational for many hours, not to participate in combat. Item 11. Harness and restraint system. Harness systems secured crew members during flight and operations. They maintained stable working positions and reduced injury risk during turbulence or limited maneuvering. This was foundational equipment for all activity inside the aircraft. Item 12. Parachute. Personal parachutes were carried for forced aircraft exit situations. They did not support the mission itself. They existed to preserve minimal survivability after all other options failed. Without parachutes, other escape systems were meaningless. Item 13. Personal survival kit. Survival kits were carried for use after aircraft exit. They included emergency communications and basic survival tools to sustain life while awaiting rescue. This reflected the real risk of B-52 deployment in hostile environments. Item 14. Emergency signaling equipment. Emergency signaling equipment was used after aircraft exit, including radios, beacons, or signal flares to mark crew position. These items did not support bombing. They existed to connect survivors with search and rescue forces. Without signaling equipment, the chance of recovery dropped sharply, even if crews survived initial escape. Item 15. Life preserver. Personal flotation devices were required for operations near coastal areas or routes crossing open water. Without them, post-escape survival chances were significantly reduced. Item 16. Ejection seat and escape system. The B-52 used escape systems to allow crew members to leave the aircraft in emergencies. This was the final option when control was lost or return was impossible. Escape systems existed to preserve crew lives. They had no role in mission completion. Without escape mechanisms, all personal survival equipment lost its meaning. Item 17. Communication systems. Communication was mandatory for the B-52 to function as part of a strategic bombing force. Radio systems maintained contact with other aircraft, support elements, and command. Flight adjustments, air defense warnings, and mission changes were transmitted through these systems. Without communication, coordination, and response were impossible. Item 18. Life raft and overwater survival system. Survival systems were carried for post-escape use, including life rafts, backup radios, water, rations, knives, signal mirrors, and lights. These items sustained life until rescue forces arrived, especially after water landings or in remote terrain. Without a complete survival system, survival probability dropped sharply. Item 19. Chaff. Chaff consisted of thin metal strips used to disrupt radar. During Linebacker II, chaff corridors were widely employed ahead of bomber formations. However, no official sources confirmed dedicated chaff dispensers on B-52 Delta or Golf models in 1972. Most chaff was deployed by escort fighters and electronic warfare aircraft. Chaff was part of the campaign, but not a direct B-52 loadout item. Item 20. Tail defensive armament. The B-52 carried tail guns to defend against rear-approaching fighters. This system was not intended to gain air superiority. It existed to extend survivability under limited conditions. This was the final defensive layer when other measures failed. One confirmed kill occurred on December 18, 1972. A MiG-21 shot down by a B-52 Delta named Diamond Lil, the only confirmed bomber air-to-air kill in history. Item 21. Maintenance and ground support dependency. The B-52 could not be deployed without ground preparation. Bomb loading, fueling, system checks, and mission configuration depended on support crews. Ground equipment and personnel did not fly the mission, but without them, no mission could occur. Item 22. Flight helmet. Flight helmets allowed crews to function in noisy, vibrating, and pressure-changing environments. They integrated headsets and microphones, supporting internal and external communication. They were not combat protection. They preserved coordination and focus over long durations. Item 23. Flight gloves. Flight gloves protected hands during equipment handling. Heat-resistant materials reduced injury risk during malfunctions or fire. They existed to maintain precise operation, not to fight. Without proper gloves, risk of injury and loss of control increased. Item 24. Potable oxygen system. The oxygen system was a mandatory condition for the crew to remain conscious at the strategic altitudes where the B-52 operated. The MS-22001 oxygen mask was not used independently. It was mounted directly to the flight helmet, forming a single integrated helmet mask system. Throughout the mission, the crew wore the helmet and mask as one combined unit, continuously connected to the aircraft's oxygen system during normal flight. The Bailout oxygen bottle served as a backup source. It was activated only when the crew was forced to exit the aircraft at high altitude, typically around 30,000 to 50,000 feet. When ejection occurred, the system automatically disconnected from the aircraft oxygen supply and switched to the personal bottle. This maintained oxygen flow during free fall and parachute deployment until descent reached an altitude where normal breathing was possible, approximately 10,000 feet. Without bailout oxygen, a crew member would lose consciousness within 20 to 30 seconds at around 40,000 feet. Not enough time to survive until reaching a safe altitude. This equipment existed for one reason only: to allow the crew to remain conscious during the moment they left the aircraft at strategic altitude. This is not simply a list of equipment. These are the material conditions required for a strategy to be executable. The B-52, with every item in its loadout, functions as a tool to sustain pressure, not to strike individual targets. Every bomb, every system, Every piece of equipment exists for a reason, and all of them serve a single purpose: to complete the strategic bombing mission. When these conditions are met, strategy can be applied. When they are absent, strategy cannot exist.